Wyoming Territory, June 1882. The wind came down off the Bighorn Mountains that morning like it had something to prove. Dust curled around the hooves of a paint mare as she came trotting into the rough-edged town of Lone Butte. Her rider hunched forward, shoulders squared like she expected a fight. Evelyn Cade did not look like a woman asking for help. She wore a man's coat, patched at the elbows, and rode with a rifle strapped across her back. Her jaw had a hard line to it, her eyes flat behind the dust. But it was not the gun or the look that made folks steer clear as she passed. It was the stories. They said she had once been married to a man who ran opium through Cheyenne, that he disappeared the same night 2 men turned up dead, and she rode out with a blood-soaked shirt and 2 babies in her arms. They said she buried 1 child in Nebraska during the winter of '79. The other Noah rode behind her now, thin arms wrapped around her waist, silent as a shadow. Wesley Archer was tying off his gelding outside the feed store when he saw her ride in. He had not seen Evelyn Cade in more than 8 years. Not since she had run off with that outlaw husband of hers and left behind a quiet little town, a church piano, and the boy who used to carry her schoolbooks. Wesley straightened up slow. She did not look at him. She rode straight for the sheriff's office, dismounted, and lifted Noah down with both hands steady. The boy looked no more than 6, small and pale, his boots too big. Evelyn's lips moved as she spoke to him, too soft to hear. Then she turned and walked inside, her coat flaring in the wind. Sheriff Danner was not a man who liked trouble. When Evelyn stepped into his office, mud on her boots and a rifle slung over her shoulder, he eyed her like she was already halfway to jail. "I am not here to make trouble," she said. "I just need a place to stop. Few days. Long enough to find work, maybe buy a mule. We will be gone by the week's end." Danner frowned. "You got any papers?" "No. Your boy's yours." "Yes. You sure you are not wanted anywhere? No bounty, no charges." "But there is a past," he said. Evelyn met his eyes. "Yes." That was when Wesley stepped through the doorway. He did not knock, did not ask, just walked in like it was the most natural thing in the world to stand beside her again. "You can stay at my place," he said. Both Evelyn and Danner looked at him. "I got a bunkhouse," Wesley added. "It is clean, I have space." Danner leaned back in his chair. "You know her, Archer." Wesley's jaw flexed. "I did, I still do." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "You do not owe me anything, Wesley." "I am not offering because I owe you," he said. "I am offering because you look like you need a damn place to sleep." Outside, Noah clutched the reins of the paint mare, watching the grown-ups talk through the window. Danner sighed, rubbed his temple. "Fine. But if there is trouble, it is on your head, Archer." Wesley nodded, already turning to leave. "Would not be the first time." They rode out to his ranch in silence. The land rolled wide and open, split with cottonwood trees and the slow shimmer of a creek winding through the summer grass. Evelyn sat stiff in the saddle, eyes scanning the horizon like she expected someone to follow. Wesley noticed. At the ranch, he helped her lift Noah down. The boy held Evelyn's hand tight, but his eyes followed Wesley. "You hungry?" Wesley asked him. Noah nodded. "Then come on. I have stew on the stove." Later, after the boy was fed and asleep in the bunkhouse bed, Evelyn stepped out onto the porch. Wesley was already there, leaning against the post, arms crossed. "You still cook stew the same way," she said quietly. "You still ride like you were born in the saddle. I was not." "I know." The silence stretched. "You do not have to do this," she said, staring out at the dark. "I do not need saving." "I am not here to save you," Wesley said. "I just want to know if you will let someone stay." She turned to look at him then. Her face was pale in the moonlight, but her eyes were sharp. "You do not know what I have done." "I know enough," he said simply. She laughed once, low and bitter. "He threatened to take Noah from me." Said he would sell him to pay a debt. I ran. I have been running since. Wesley's jaw clenched. You do not have to run anymore. Her lips trembled just slightly. I do not know how to stop. He did not touch her. Just stood close and let her feel the quiet of the land, the steadiness of the man beside her. He knew not to push. Not yet. Inside, Noah slept with one hand curled under his cheek and the other wrapped around an old wooden horse Evelyn had carved for him. And out on the porch, Wesley Archer watched the woman he had once loved fight against years of fear and loss and finally start to breathe again. He was not afraid of her past. He just needed to know if she would let him be her future. The sun pulled slow over the ridgeline the next morning, brushing soft light across the cottonwood leaves. Evelyn stood at the edge of the paddock, sleeves rolled to her elbows, watching Noah feed chicken scratch to a line of pecking hens. He moved careful, measured, like he was always listening for something behind him. She didn't call out, just kept her hand resting on the post while the breeze lifted strands of her hair. Wesley's boots came quiet through the dew-wet grass. I've got a fence down along the north line, he said. Could use a second set of hands if you've a mind to help. Evelyn didn't look over. I don't know fence work. You learn fast, he said. Always did. She glanced at him then, brow furrowed. You're not asking to be kind. No, he said. I'm asking because I don't like working alone if I don't have to. Wesley led the way toward the barn where a pair of cedar posts leaned against the wall, and a roll of wire sat half-spooled beside a dented tin bucket. Evelyn picked up the hammer without hesitation and followed him through the grass, boots sinking into damp soil. The fence line ran along a shallow draw where elk sometimes pushed through in winter. One post had cracked near the base, likely from frost. Wesley handed her a new one. Set it 3 feet deep. I'll brace the bottom. She knelt and dug with the spade he gave her, breath even, hand steady. The silence between them wasn't strained, it hung quiet like the hush before a storm broke. When the post was in, she stood back and dusted her palms on her trousers. How long have you had this land? She asked. 4 years, he said, twisting wire taut between staples. Bought it off a widow who moved east to live with her daughter. You live here alone, he nodded. I got a dog that comes and goes, that's about it. Evelyn tilted her head. You ever think about leaving? No, he said. I built it with my own hands, even the porch. She didn't reply, but her gaze drifted toward the hills. The wind tugged at the braid down her back. You looking to keep going? He asked. I was. That change, I'm not sure. Her voice was quiet. Noah needs stillness. I haven't given him much of it. He sleeps heavy here, Wesley said. I heard him breathing from the porch. She hesitated, then met his eyes. You stayed out there all night. I didn't want you waking up alone. Evelyn's throat worked before she spoke again. You were always like that. I haven't changed much. No, she said softly. You haven't. They walked the line together until the sun climbed high. By the time they circled back to the barn, dirt clung to their sleeves and sweat soaked the collar of Wesley's shirt. Evelyn brushed her hands clean on a rag and turned toward the bunkhouse where Noah sat on the steps, carving something with a small, whittling knife. Wesley looked down at the shape in the boy's hands. That a squirrel? Noah didn't look up. It's a fox. Looks like a good one. Noah nodded once, then held the carving out to Evelyn. She took it without saying anything, running her thumb along the rough grain. He doesn't talk much, she said. He talks enough, Wesley replied. Just not with words. She gave a slow nod, then tucked the carving into her coat. That evening, after Noah had eaten and curled up in the cot with a wool blanket pulled to his chin, Evelyn walked the edge of the property, boots scuffing through dry grass. Wesley followed without speaking. They stopped near the creek where frogs croaked low and steady. The water was shallow, clear over smooth stones. I used to think about this, she said, almost to herself. Not this place, but a place. Somewhere I didn't have to glance over my shoulder. You don't have to anymore. She stood quiet for a long time. You ever think about what might have been? I did, he said. Then I saw you again, and now I'm thinking about what still could. Evelyn's eyes didn't leave the water. You don't know what I've had to become. I don't need to, he said. I see who you are now. She turned to him, not cautious this time, but searching. And that's enough for you, he didn't blink. It's everything. The frogs went quiet for a moment as if the land itself held its breath. Then Evelyn stepped closer, close enough that Wesley could see the freckle on her cheek he remembered from their schoolyard days. I don't need saving, she said again, but her voice was different now, not a warning, a confession. I know, he said. I'm just asking if you'll let me stay. She reached out then, not with trembling hands but with the kind of certainty that only comes after years of running. And when her fingers brushed his, rough and warm from the day's work, she didn't pull away. Wesley carried the kettle out to the porch just after dusk, steam curling into the cooling air. Evelyn was sitting on the top step with her knees drawn close, sleeves rolled down now, her hands folded over them. She didn't speak as he set the kettle down between them, just watched the last of the light slip off the tall grass and leave the land in shadow. He poured 2 tin cups full, passed her one. You still take it plain? He asked. I do, she said, then took a sip. Thank you. The quiet between them wasn't heavy, just settled. Somewhere out near the barn, an owl gave a low call. Wesley sipped his coffee and glanced toward the bunkhouse window where a faint lamp glow meant Noah was still awake. He's reading, Evelyn said, catching his look. I taught him letters from an old almanac we found in a broken-down wagon outside Rawlins. Wesley let that sink in, then said, You did right by him. She didn't answer right away. Some days I believe that. You should believe it every day. I try, she said. But it's hard to know what's right when all you've done is run. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You're not running anymore, she studied his profile. You said you hadn't changed, but you have, Wesley. You've grown into yourself. He gave a quiet hum. Maybe. Took time. Evelyn looked out at the dark. You ever think about marrying? I did once, he said. But she was sweet on a man who worked the rail line out of Laramie. I wasn't going to chase after something that didn't want to be caught. Evelyn's voice was soft. You never wanted children. I figured I'd have him if I ever had the chance. Never happened, he paused. But I like that boy of yours. He listens. Her shoulders eased. He doesn't trust easy. Don't blame him, but he looked me in the eye this morning when I handed him that spool of wire. That's something. Evelyn turned her cup in her hands. I thought I was done with wanting things, real things. A room with a dry roof, a man who didn't raise his voice, a place that didn't come with a map folded in my coat pocket. Wesley didn't speak. He just waited. I always thought I'd have to choose, she said finally. Safety or honesty, not both. You don't, he said. She looked at him, clear and steady. You're not afraid of what I've done. No, he said. I'm afraid of letting you walk away before you know you don't have to. She stood slowly and stepped down off the porch, crossing the yard to the fence. He followed, not close, just enough to be near. She rested her arms on the top rail, watching the sky. I've seen things I can't forget, she said. I won't ask you to, he said. I'll just be beside you while they fade. She turned then, not quick, but with full weight behind it. You mean to stay? I do. She moved closer, close enough the warmth of her was a small, steady thing under the stars. Then I'll try, she said. I'll try to believe this is allowed. Wesley reached out and took her hand, not a gesture of possession, but one of promise. It is. Behind them, the bunkhouse lamp went out, and in the quiet dark, Evelyn Cade let herself breathe deep and full, like a woman who had finally found solid ground. The wheatgrass turned gold in late July, and the wind softened. Days stretched long and quiet across the land, marked by the rhythm of work and the quiet presence of three souls settling into something they hadn't named yet. Evelyn rose early, boots on before the sky lightened, and worked beside Wesley without needing to ask where she was needed. Noah followed her lead, small hands busy with chores suited to his size, gathering feed sacks, brushing down the mare, minding the smokehouse fire when the meat was hung to dry. One afternoon, Evelyn found Wesley in the lean-to sharpening a draw knife. He didn't look up when she stepped in, but his posture shifted, as if some part of him eased just knowing she was there. "I was thinking," she said, brushing sawdust from the bench before sitting. "Noah needs a school before winter." He set the blade down and wiped the edge with a cloth. "Nearest's in Sweetwater. That's a ride too far for a boy his age. I could teach him here." Wesley nodded once. "There's a spare desk in the loft. Could clear space, build a shelf." "He's quick," she said. "But he needs other children, too. You looking to stay long enough to worry about that? I'm not sure what staying means yet." Her hands curled around her knees. "But I don't see a reason to leave." He leaned back, arms resting on his thighs. "I've been thinking about the land west of the creek. It's good soil. If I had help, I could put in a second field." She tilted her head. "You offering me a plow, I'm offering you a stake. Whatever you want to make of it." Evelyn didn't answer at first. She picked up a small chisel from the workbench, turned it over in her fingers. "I haven't owned anything since before Noah was born," she said finally. "Not really, not something I could keep without hiding." "You wouldn't have to hide here. I know." Her voice was low. "That's what scares me." Wesley didn't push. He picked up the draw knife again, ran it slow across the strop. The rasp of it filled the lean-to. That night, Evelyn sat on the porch while Noah slept inside, his breath even against the bunkhouse walls. Wesley brought out 2 blankets and handed her one without a word. She draped it across her lap, watching the stars rise over the ridge. "You know what day it is?" she asked. "No." "It's been 50 days since we rode into town." He glanced at her. "I counted," she said. "It's the longest we've stayed anywhere in 3 years. He didn't respond, but the silence between them deepened. "I used to think if I stopped moving, I'd start unraveling, like the only thing holding me together was the running. You've held together just fine." "I've held on," she said. "That's not the same thing." Wesley turned toward her. "What do you want now?" "I don't know yet." She looked down at the blanket, fingers twisting the edge. "But I'm not afraid to find out." He reached over, slow and careful, and touched the back of her hand. She didn't pull away. Inside, the oil lamp flickered low in the corner, casting warm light across the floorboards. The wind passed through the cottonwoods, whispering over the roof. Evelyn didn't speak again for a long while. But when she finally did, her voice was steadier. "If I stayed," she said, "if I helped plant that second field, what would that mean to you?" Wesley looked at her, eyes steady. "It'd mean I'd get to build something with you, not just a field. A life." She studied him, not with doubt, but with the weight of someone measuring the shape of trust. "I'd need to do it on equal footing," she said. "You'd have it," he said. "Every inch," she nodded once. "Then I'll stay, not just for Noah, for me." His fingers curled gently around hers, not claiming, just anchoring. And Evelyn Cade, who had carried so much in silence for so long, let herself lean not from weariness, but because she wanted to. The stars held their places above the land, and for once, she didn't wonder what came next. She already knew. The first frost came early that year, crisping the edges of the cottonwood leaves before the full weight of August had passed. Evelyn stood at the edge of the field Wesley had tilled west of the creek, her hands tucked beneath her shawl. Rows of shoots poked from the dark earth, stubborn against the cold. She leaned into the wind and breathed deep, the smell of turned soil grounding her like a hand on her back. Wesley's voice came behind her, low and sure. "We'll have to cover the seedlings tonight. Might hold them through the cold snap." She turned, catching the faint lines of concern around his eyes. "I can help with the tarps. I've stitched most of the ones from the shed." He nodded, then brushed his hand along the back of his neck. "I was thinking we ought to build a root cellar before winter, not just for food, somewhere you can store sewing and salt, keep things dry." "That'd be wise," she said. "I can draw up a plan." My mother kept one built into a slope behind our kitchen. It stayed cold even in July. They stood in the field a while longer, the wind tugging at the hem of her skirt. When she stepped closer, Wesley didn't speak. He just watched her carefully, as if gauging something unspoken. "I got a letter," she said at last, "from a woman I met in Fort Fetterman, Mary Greeley. She takes in children orphaned by the rail camps, wants to know if I'll teach, said she heard I'd settled." Wesley's brow lifted slightly. "You thinking of going?" Evelyn looked past him to the line of pine along the ridge. "I thought I would, until I read it twice and realized I didn't want to leave. I wouldn't stop you, I know." She looked at him fully now. "But you'd let me build something different here. A schoolroom in the barn, maybe, just through the colder months. I've got books enough to start." His face softened. "You'd be good at that. I want Noah to see me do something with my hands beyond mending and cooking." She paused. "I want him to see that we can build more than we escape." Wesley stepped forward, the distance between them no more than a breath. "I've been thinking about the future, about what it could be if you meant to stay for good." "I do," she said quietly, "not just for the winter. For good." There was a long silence, not from hesitation, but from the weight of truth settling between them. Wesley reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn pouch. "This was my mother's," he said. "She gave it to me when I turned 20. Said I'd know when to pass it on." Evelyn opened the pouch. Inside sat a silver ring, plain but well made, the band etched with a single line of knotwork. "I don't have a preacher," he said, "but I've got land, a roof, and a heart set on you if that's something you'd take." She didn't cry. Her hands didn't shake. She held the ring with the reverence of someone who understood its weight, and then she looked up and nodded once firmly. "I'd take it," she said. "And I'd give you mine." They married under the cottonwoods 3 days later, with Noah standing between them, holding the ring in his small palm like a sacred thing. Wesley spoke his vows without flourish, eyes steady, and Evelyn answered with a voice clear as mountain air. There was no church bell, no lace, just a wind that carried the scent of pine and the quiet joy of something finally come home. That night, Evelyn tucked Noah beneath a thick quilt in the bunkhouse, then stepped out into the cold where Wesley waited near the porch. He held out a wool blanket, wrapped it around her shoulders. "You cold?" "Not anymore." He kissed her then, slow and unhurried, like no one was watching and time had settled for them alone. She leaned into him, hands at his waist, and let herself feel the warmth of what they'd made. A space where she could be more than what she'd survived. The next morning she woke early and watched dawn stretch gold over the hills. Wesley slept beside her, one arm flung across the quilt, hair tousled from sleep. She touched his wrist lightly, then rose to light the stove and start the day. Noah stirred in the bunkhouse when the scent of coffee reached him, and by the time Wesley stepped into the kitchen, the boy was reading aloud from the primer Evelyn had placed on the table. She turned from the stove, wiped her hands on her apron, and smiled, not the cautious, measured smile she'd worn when she arrived, but something full and open. Wesley kissed her temple in passing and poured a cup from the kettle. Outside, The frost had melted to dew, and two bluebirds perched on the fence where they'd hung the tarps to dry. The field beyond the creek held its green, stubborn and sure. Evelyn stepped onto the porch, shawl wrapped loose around her shoulders, and breathed in the morning. She no longer carried maps in her coat pocket. She didn't need to. She was home,